Recording in progress.
All right, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning or good evening from wherever you're joining. A warm welcome to you from the AFPIF Program Committee, bringing you this AFPIF VPS 15, which will be on unlocking cross-border connectivity to landlocked countries in Africa. Okay, yes. So welcome to the event. We will be discussing unlocking cross-border connectivity to landlocked countries in Africa. And we will be supported today by your moderators, myself, Michelle Opiyo, as well as Jacob Dagunduro from IXPN in Nigeria. We'll be having some panel discussions planned for you. We have panelists from across Africa in various regions, in various industries that will be helping us take through this discussion that we'll be having. We'll have an opportunity to have some Q&A today, as well as some peering personals and a social at the end, so we can actually get to engage with one another, even as we participate here in AFPIF VPS. So our session's objectives for this event is to understand the general overview of the internet connectivity landscape in the coastal countries and the landlocked countries, and how that has been impacted over the years of the development in that, to highlight some of the challenges that are experienced by landlocked countries across Africa, and highlight some interventions and innovations that key players can play in order to improve the situation as it's being seen, as well as lessons from other continents, and identifying some key players and policies that will foster local traffic growth in Africa. So just a little bit of housekeeping as we go along. This session is actually being recorded, and the recording will be made available after the session. It's also being streamed live on social media. We have Facebook, Twitch, and Vimeo. So we encourage you to engage respectfully and responsibly. And when asking questions, please keep it simple and to the point. Kindly format your questions with your first name and your country, just so we can know where you're from and where our listeners and participants are from. And also you can get familiar with the rest of the Internet Society's Code of Conduct on the URL provided below. So for you to engage with us, which we would love you to do, we have a chat room where you're able to actually engage with the other attendees, share your opinions and some of your experiences there, as well as a Q&A room for you to share your actual questions that you'd like the panelists or speakers to address on your behalf. So we're looking forward to engaging with you on social media as well. We're using the hashtags #IPeerInAfrica, as well as hashtag IXPs and hashtag virtual peering. So you can use that across the various social media platforms in order to just encourage others to participate as well. We do have interpretation today. We have English and French supported, and we also have some captioning available in English. So we hope that all our participants from East and West Africa or across Africa are able to participate fully in today's proceedings. Our sponsors today for simultaneous interpretation services is Flex Optics. They've been a very supportive partner throughout the years, and we're happy to have them on board, helping us engage more with our members. We also have other sponsors for this series. We have MainOne, we have Meta, Microsoft, NAP Africa, and PAX as well. So thank you to our sponsors for being very supportive throughout this virtual peering series that we've had, and we're looking forward to engaging with you further. We do have other event sponsors. We have Workonline Communications that has been very supportive, as well as RAC Center. So thank you to our sponsors for making this possible for us. For our panel discussions, we have a great distinguished group of panelists that will be speaking to us today. We have Ben Roberts, Group Chief Technology and Innovation Officer at Liquid Intelligent Technologies. We have Brian Longwe, Converged Technology Networks in Malawi. We have Emmanuel Kwarteng, MainOne, Ghana, as well as Ben Real, Edge Strategy Manager at Meta. We have Patrick Christian, who will be our opening speaker, giving us a presentation on the current state of interconnectivity within Africa, who is a principal analyst with telegeography. So we'd like, with that, to introduce our speaker right off the bat, Patrick Christian, who will be taking us through his presentation on the current status of the interconnectivity scene within Africa. Patrick Christian is a principal analyst at telegeography. He has over 20 years of experience in telecom market research. He heads the Cloud and WAN infrastructure research services and focuses on Africa and European markets, specializing in international bandwidth markets and internet infrastructure as well. So with that, we'd like to welcome you, Patrick, to start us off and give us some context to what we'll be discussing here today. And thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate it. Okay. Hello, everybody. Let's get started. Let me throw up the presentation and get some maps and stuff going here. There we go. Okay, let's start off with by building some context for the discussion, as Michelle was talking about. For the discussion that will follow, let's by tracking the cross-border IP capacity for the past 10 years up to present. And first, we'll be walking through or looking at Africa and Europe, and then capacity and connectivity within Africa, looking at the subsea capacity versus terrestrial, and then we'll move to capacity of landlocked countries. So just like a big overview of what's happening with some numbers and maps in a lot of lines. This slide you may be familiar with. We've looked at this slide over the past few years. This is what we're looking at as the current state of international capacity or connectivity for Africa. We're up to 26 terabits of international capacity connecting Africa. But as we've discussed and as in previous panels, and most of this capacity, the vast majority, 80% of it, is still connected to Europe. But we're starting to see a change here, a shift. In the north, we see increasing connectivity to Europe, whereas in sub-Saharan Africa, we're starting to see a lot more of the focus of international capacity within Africa itself. So there have been a lot of changes over these last 3 years. And let's see, if we do in this slide, what we're looking at is we're looking at top 10 coastal routes and coastal sub-Saharan African routes and landlocked countries, just to kind of get an overview of what's happening. If we go back 10 years, 2009 through 2012 is when we start to see a lot of the sub cables coming online on the east and the west coast of Africa. But at that moment, 2010, we're looking at a total international capacity for Africa of about 500 gig. And very, very little, less than about 10% of it was within Africa. It's mostly starting to go to Europe at that time. And of this, only a paltry 1% is terrestrial capacity. And if you look at the three lines, the first line, the gold line, shows all of the coastal routes. This includes North Africa, where you see that's where a lot of the capacity is, of course. But then if we strip out the North African routes and just look at sub-Saharan African routes, that's the blue line. And then if we just look at onward connectivity to the terrestrial connectivity to the more landlocked countries and seeing where this capacity is coming in, we see it's a very, very small percentage of total capacity at the moment. So let's go to 2000, shoot up to 2016, okay. This is when we're starting to see a little bit more interconnectivity within Africa. And we're up to about 3.5 terabits of international capacity. When I say international, it's any cross-border connectivity. And like I said before, most of it is up to Europe, but we are see a lot more within Africa. But still, it's only at about 10% of all the international capacity in 2016, and just about 4% of this capacity is terrestrial. There are very, very few routes within Africa that are over 10G. Most of them, the major ones, are less than 50 Gs. The biggest routes are around 50 gigs. Okay, and then let's go to, now this is looking at intra-African routes in 2021. So 5 years later, you see a lot of the circles represent the amount of total international capacity in the country. And we see that South Africa, of course, and Egypt ballooning, and Nigeria and Kenya growing pretty steadily there. But we're seeing some of these lines get a lot fatter. And so now we're starting to see, especially in the last 3 years, and a lot of this, some of this may be due to the new cloud service provider data centers opening up in South Africa. We're seeing a rerouting of traffic, and we're seeing maybe more content that's localizing in Africa. So we're seeing some of the routes change a bit, and we're seeing some of the intra-African routes grow a bit more. But also what we're looking at here is, even though these routes in this map look like they're all terrestrial, really the largest routes between the countries, for example, South Africa to Kenya, or South Africa to Nigeria, or Ghana to Nigeria, these are still mostly, or the majority of the capacity isn't terrestrial, of course. This is still subsea capacity, not terrestrial. The terrestrial is still lacking, but we're seeing it starting to grow. And then if we look at shifting to looking at where the major routes are growing inland to connect the landlocked countries, or where we're seeing the most growth in the terrestrial build out, it's no surprise. We can look to the hubs of subsea, the subsea system hubs connecting Africa. This is basically the different locations, different countries where there's many subcable landings. And all of these circles are for countries that have 8 to 10 subcable landings. So this is where we see where there's a ton of capacity since about 2010 at the shores, but little going in or connecting within Africa. And if we look at from here, it pushes in and we can see the major terrestrial routes that are growing. We're seeing mostly at first anyway, through Kenya to Uganda, and then Uganda onward to Rwanda. And we're also seeing Tanzania to the same area on the eastern side, kind of the eastern quarter. And of course, in the south, up through South Africa into Zimbabwe and Zambia. And we see it, a lot of this traffic or capacity converging on DRC or making its way there. But most of the capacity, like we said, is in inland capacity. We see Uganda, Rwanda, Zimbabwe from Kenya and South Africa. But if we shift over to the west side, we see that not as much onward capacity, but we do see from Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana moving in up through Burkina Faso and some into Mali as well, and just trickling into other countries like Niger and Chad, etc. And a lot of these routes are very small and they don't show up in actually the maps that we're showing. And we'll discuss a little bit more in the panel of why that is. But refocusing back on the inland routes again, this is just the same map we saw a couple of slides ago, where we're seeing some of the onward connectivity to these landlocked countries where we see the most growth. And some of these routes we're seeing now getting up to the same size as many of the subsea routes for intra-African routes, up to the multiple hundreds of gigs in capacity. But really, we're just looking there at these are the top 5. Below that, it's between 50 gig and 100 gig. And a lot of the smaller routes are still well under 50 gig. And some of the factors, of course, that are affecting these landlocked countries, and that we'll be discussing on today, is we see like in pricing and access to capacity. We're talking a lot about that. Pricing is still very high for all this onward connectivity. For example, even the cheapest routes or cheapest locations are very expensive. Like for IPT out of Uganda is still about 4 to 5 times higher than internet transit through, for example, out of Kenya, Nigeria, or South Africa. We've seen a lot of prices dropping in Nigeria and also in Kenya, but inland it's still very, very expensive. And waves too are still at the very cheapest, at least double the cost or double the price of waves to the coastal cities. And for access to capacity, of course, inland is much less capacity. On the countries, the coastal countries average about 5 times the international capacity or connectivity that the landlocked countries do. And also just because they are landlocked, they also have, the landlocked countries have a lot less access to multiple or redundant routes that are, of course, much higher on the coast. And we see that this leads to problems if they're for connectivity to the country, if one of those few connections drops, and then the whole country can lose connectivity. So I hope this gives a little bit of an overview of what's happening. And now I'll hand it back off to the panel to cover some of the reasons behind all of this.
Great. Actually, we do have a few questions in the Q&A. Maybe you can address those now as
Sure.
the panelists get together to get ready for their presentations.
Sure. Let me open it up.
First question we have, is there a reason why the intra-Africa routes are concentrated in South and Eastern Africa? Is this due to South Africa?
Yes, exactly. It's like I was saying, where you have the most subcables landing, of course, are South Africa and Kenya, in some of the red circles that they have there. And we see these are the locations, of course, where there's the most capacity. So we see these are also the locations where most of the onward connectivity from, for example, Europe or from the coast is going in. So we see that up through South Africa, of course, and through the east. Kenya mostly, but also through Tanzania as well.
Okay. Another question we have here is, how much of the subsea capacity that lands in Egypt is actually usable by Egyptians?
Can't give you an exact number, but of course, a lot of the capacity that lands in Egypt is really transiting Egypt as well. Although it is a country like most of the North African countries that are well connected and have a high amount of international capacity that is available to local population. Of course, due to the location of Egypt, a lot of this is transit capacity too. That's onwards, the link between East Africa and Asia to Europe.
Okay. So with the many new subsea cables, do you foresee a future market glut in the subsea cable industry for Africa?
Of course, there's always a lot of talk of this, but it seems that the more capacity or more connectivity, and this is why the terrestrial or cross-border connectivity within Africa, not talking about just subcables landing, is very important, because once we see that more users or end users have access to capacity and it's high quality, good performance connectivity, we see usage increase. So it's, we don't see this very much globally, that there's a glut of capacity. In fact, it's usually the opposite, that there's not enough capacity. And as we see, like, for example, in Africa as content providers kind of they hearken the growth of a lot of more regional networks, et cetera, growing as content is localizing, like in South Africa right now. this actually builds demand. So they'll be trying to build more and more to keep up with the capacity demand as the internet works better.
Yeah, and I also think that cables also do have a lifespan. So as more come into, some are also getting out of their lifespan, and they'll be unusable in a couple of years. Correct.
In 5 to 10 years, for the group that came right before 2010.
Yeah. Okay, I think we'll take 2 more questions. We have quite a number from here. So Norani thanks you for your presentation, and she asks, where do you see most of the in-country fiber infrastructure being built at the moment? So internal country terrestrial fiber.
The terrestrial fiber, I mean, what we've seen, and of course, we're always looking kind of the 6 months to a year before of what, as we're getting information from the ISPs where they're building out and stuff. We are seeing, like, of course, all around Kenya on the East Coast and going inland and hitting Uganda, Rwanda. And you kind of see the loop around going to making the way to DRC. Of course, DRC at the moment, because the size, like Nigeria, we're seeing a lot of growth towards DRC. That's kind of the untapped market. We're also seeing possible growth in Ethiopia, depending on what's happening politically, but we're seeing a lot of activity there as well. Because once again, it's a huge market. And before, we see a lot of cable landings in Djibouti, but there was very little capacity Djibouti down into Ethiopia, but we see, up through Kenya. And of course, all around South Africa, there's always been growth there. So that's where we see the largest routes. But we're starting to see in the West, a lot of it is led by incumbents in the area or groups in the area, but we're seeing a lot of growth kind of catching up to the East in terms of cross-border connectivity. So, like everywhere, it's been sitting on the coast for so long, but we're starting to see that build out a little bit too over there.
Okay, and maybe, I guess, tying to that would be, how does the intra-Africa traffic compare with the traffic that goes out of Africa, percentage-wise? What would you think we're looking at?
The traffic itself, we don't look specifically at how much traffic there is. We're looking at kind of the size of the pipes. And like I was saying earlier, it's we definitely do see within the last 3 years, more of the traffic staying within Africa. Instead of routing up all the way to go to Europe, it'll come out and go down to South Africa, et cetera. In specifically looking at the cloud service providers and what's going on there. We're seeing a lot more traffic, but it's kind of for us, what we see for the connectivity is the 80-20 split. But this is skewed because in the north, due to proximity to Europe, North Africa is building up more and more and more capacity going to Europe to hit content. But we're seeing it's a completely different story in sub-Saharan Africa, where you have more content, you're further away from Europe, and performance is better. And if the content's there, you see a lot of African countries staying within Africa. And so there we see not just 10%, but like 30% of the capacity, 30-40% staying within Africa.
Okay. I think, there's been an improvement over years. You're right with that. With hyperscalers entering the subsea market space, adjacent markets are now being formed for cloud and DC. Do you see the end to CPS soon?
CSP?
Will hyperscalers, communication service providers, I guess ISPs and the like, and maybe other carriers as well.
The carrier service providers? No, I mean, I don't. Short answer, no, of course. You need the two. The CSPs, or the CSPs is in the cloud service providers, or the hyperscalers, they may have connectivity on main routes, but they don't have the connectivity to the end user like a lot of the local ISPs and carriers do. So I think, there's a little bit of work. They need to hit the local end users, so they need the ISPs as well, of course, or the carriers. So.
Yes, thank you so much. We do have a French question for you. So maybe you can switch to the French interpretation so that you're able to actually hear it and respond to it.
Okay. Quelles sont les conséquences pour un pays d'avoir son réseau sorti international?
You know French, I forgot.
A little bit. Oof. This one I may have to work with a little bit later, but basically, what are the consequences for a country having its network, its international network, qui est géré à l'étranger, managed outside of the country? Yeah, this is a hard question to cover in this. I may follow up with you directly on this, but I'm not 100% sure what you mean by managed from the exterior, maybe from kind of mothership countries. Let's see. Let's pull this one offline and let the panelists start, and we can talk more about this.
Yeah,
some of this will be coming.
Yeah, okay. I think that's a great idea.
So contact me directly on that one.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I think thank you so much for your presentation, Patrick, and for skillfully answering all the questions you've had. You clearly generated a lot of discussion from the participants. So thank you so much for being here.
Welcome. And now the panel will answer all those questions.
That was great. Thank
all the
you.
details. Okay, thank you very much.
All right, cool. For everyone who's asked some questions, if your question hasn't been answered yet, we still do have some time, and we'll bring them back up as we go along. And some of them will be answered during the panel question. And if they're not, we will bring them up at the end. So thank you for participating as well. And with that, I will hand over to my co-moderator, Jacob, who will be introducing the panelists to us and taking us through just some of the discussions that will address some of these questions that we have on our minds. So Jacob, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Okay, yeah, thank you so much, Michelle. Yeah, thanks, Patrick, for the wonderful presentation. It's very, very insightful. Okay, so we'll be putting all together in the panel discussion. Right now, we have interesting panelists here today to dig more into the topic. But just before we go into that, like I said earlier, my name is Jacob Dagunduro from work with the IX Internet Exchange Point of Nigeria here. So I would want us to take, there's a poll question that we'll just take quickly, just to get everyone into this, just before we go into the panel discussion. So you can see the poll question right now. So the question says, what do you consider, based on what we've had and your experience, what do you consider to be the major challenge with cross-border connectivity in landlocked countries in Africa or any part of the world? So what do you consider to be the major challenges, probably based on your experience, if you're in a landlocked country, or you are within the landlocked region of a particular country? So you can just get that. Okay. So I'll leave the poll on for just 1 minute, one more minute, and then we close it. Okay. So I think we can close on the poll now. Okay. Oh, so here are the results now. So based on the poll, the three options. So we see the second option seems to be going higher. So 57% of the participants actually believe that lack of infrastructure, such as national backbone, is a major challenge. While we have the next to that is lack of enabling policies, probably within the countries or within or interactions between the country. And then the lower one, which is 16%, agrees that political relationship with the neighboring countries. So we have more of lack of infrastructure, such as national backbone. Okay, so thank you for that. So we'll be going into the panel discussion where we'll be digging more into this, and each of these points will probably learn more from our panelists. So in our panel discussion here today, we have panelists with wealth of experience. Let me share this. Switch here. Okay, so we have in the panel today, we have Brian Longwe. Brian Longwe is an experienced network person, is not new in the industry. He has been doing this for quite some years. So I'll just go through his profile. Brian Longwe started building networks that connect Africa to the rest of the world for over 20 years now. Over this period, he has co-founded and run internet service provider in Kenya, Uganda, and Malawi. He also facilitated the establishment of internet exchange points in Kenya, in Uganda, Tanzania, DR Congo, Rwanda, and other African countries. Brian has vast experience in high city policy, regulation, public-private partnership, and has served in various capacity in regional and continental initiatives that seeks to address the policies, legal and regulatory challenges of intra-Africa connectivity and Africa internet developments generally. So between the year 2015 and 2018, Brian served as the general manager of Simbanet Malawi, the company that implemented a World Bank-funded public-private partnership venture that builds and operates a fiber optic network that connects Malawi to the rest of the world. Over the past 3 years, he has served as the co-founder and CEO of Converged Technology Network, a broadband internet service provider in Malawi. So you can be rest assured that with the wealth of experience that he has in interconnecting network for over the years and his involvement in this area, we will learn from his wealth of knowledge here today. That's welcome, Brian Longwe. Also within our panelists today is Mr. Emmanuel Kwarteng. Mr. Emmanuel Kwarteng is the country manager of MainOne Ghana, with the responsibility of P&L for Ghana internet and data connectivity and data center business. He also served as the head of network for the Ghana and Francophone business, with oversight responsibility for undersea cable build and expansion, customer solution design, fiber and radio infrastructure deployment, and facility management. And he will be joining the panelists today to also share his perspective, and we'll learn a lot from him as well. So also within our panelists, also we have Ben Roberts. Ben Roberts from Liquid Telecom. Ben Roberts has been with Liquid Intelligence Telecommunication, Intelligence Technology, Group Chief Technology and Innovation Officer since 2017. Having previously served as the CTO since 2006. He has over 20 years of experience across a range of technologies in design, support, integration, and operational management role. He has led the group's networking and product strategy, expanding its technology base across Africa. You are welcome to the panel, Ben Roberts. So without wasting much time, we'll be going into the discussion, and having had the statistics that Patrick actually shared with us. So one other panelist, so sorry to skip that. I think Ben, we also have another Ben. Ben from Meta is also part of the panelists today. Ben has been with Meta for over 5 years now and is responsible for edge strategy in sub-Sahara African region, working with his team, partnering with ISPs and focusing on peering and catching within the region to ensure that everyone using the product of Meta have best experience possible. Before Meta, Ben was the technology director data at 6 Degrees, a VC-backed UK-based MSP provider in UK. Ben is also the chair of Peering DB Outreach Committee. So you are welcome on board, Ben. So while we go into the discussion, and based on the statistics that has been shared, I would want to say to everyone that while this discussion is going on, if you have questions, just feel free to just enter your, just type in your question in the Q&A section, and on our social medias too. You can do hashtag #IPeerInAfrica, hashtag IXPs, hashtag virtual peering. So we're going into the discussion, and the first question that comes to mind is this. Okay, I haven't had this about interconnectivity and the challenges with landlocked countries. We have a lot of submarine cables coming into Africa and focusing on Africa. What is it there for us? And why do we need to have this cross-border connectivity? What is it for us? If we don't do it, is there something we tend to lose? What is it there for us? Is it really a necessary area of focus for us in Africa? So I will throw that to Brian Longwe to give us a response. So Brian, what's your thoughts? What is it for us in Africa focusing on this cross-border connectivity? What do we have at stake?
Right. Thank you very much for the introduction, Jacob, and also for the question. I would like to say that the issue of cross-border connectivity is a major concern, and it should be a major concern for anybody who lives and works in Africa. It has been proven, of course, over the last maybe 15, 20, 25 years, how vital ICTs are to development in Africa. If we look at the presentation that Patrick just shared, and you see the advent of submarine cables across most of Africa starting around 2010, you can literally, the growth of connectivity to the GDP growth of those countries in those countries that were affected by the presence of these submarine networks. If you look at the kind of explosion in terms of venture capital, innovation, tech, the types of deals that are being made in terms of startups across the continent over the last 2-3 years, most of them are happening in these countries that are well connected. So it goes without saying that there is a direct economic benefit for countries that have affordable bandwidth and quick, good quality. I think Patrick also mentioned about the quality of the connectivity. So any country that wants to develop, and I believe every country in Africa wants to develop, wants to move a step up, cannot overlook the value and the importance of inter-country or intra-African connectivity. It may not just be for purposes of, one of the big things that comes to mind, of course, is this thing that our policymakers have been going on and on and on about over recent years, which is, trying to make ourselves into one market, trying to move closer to a single African market. Connectivity plays a big role in that. However, when we look at the actual situation on the ground in most of our countries, we find that while our leaders may be saying one thing, they're doing a completely different thing, right? We still have a lot of barriers. We have regulatory barriers. We have, this thing called our sovereignty, which I think is a fancy name for a drug that drives African leaders crazy. Because the moment people get into leadership positions, they start doing things that don't make sense. So we have a lot of barriers that are created by our policymakers, by our leaders. Licensing regimes that deliberately prevent and make it harder or even more difficult for a network to go across the border. If we look at other markets, which have landlocked countries or countries that are close to each other, Europe, Asia, you will find, South America, you find that they've been able to move ahead and overcome some of these territorial issues, jurisdiction issues. And you have licenses that are beginning to be recognized across borders, where you have a license in the country of origin that is recognized in neighboring countries and allows for delivery of services across the borders. I won't go, too much into this because it is a topic that is very close to my heart. But we still have a long way to go, I would say. We still have a long way to go. Our leaders, we need to think of ways of being able to get our, political leaders to change their view. We spent a lot of time, if I recall, in the mid-2000s, lobbying the African Union, Commerce, African regional economic blocs, the East African economic bloc. And we were able, through that lobby, to push the agenda of exchange to any ministry, any country, talk about it, stand exchange points, support the to deliberately come up with positions that
okay, I'm not sure. I think we lost Brian. Okay, I think we lost Brian due to probably connectivity. But okay, so we'll have been back. It's connected. Brian, if you're back, you can just okay. So I think we just go on. Thank you so much, Brian, for that context and the overview. I think one important thing that there is cross-border licensing. It's something very important, and I think since it's working somewhere, something that others can adopt. Okay, so haven't said that. Okay, so I went through this to Mr. Emmanuel Kwarteng. What exactly is the current status from your perspective?
Sorry, I dropped off.
Region. Yes. Thank you. Okay, so we'll get back to you. Thank you. So I'm trying this to Emmanuel. So what exactly is the current status of connectivity? And I mean, you operate a network that even within a region, at least you have maintained fiber connectivity at the shore. What's your experience, and what's the current status from your experience in regard even getting across to other countries that are landlocked? And what's your thoughts? What's the current status? How has it been?
Yeah, thank you, Jacob, and thanks to everybody on the call. So with regards to West Africa, we also, we share a similar with other parts of Africa. We see we have a lot of capacity at the coast, and of course, with the extension to the regional or bordering countries, it's not really available. What we have part of it, but it's not major. We've seen that there are hindrances that are in place with this extension of cable or extension of capacity to landlocked countries. Top on that, we probably would do, which Brian had mentioned, licenses. Most of the operators in this region are licensed within specific countries. There's no really cross-border licensing regime in any effect. And of course, if you want to extend like we do, having regional connectivity, which means that you have to have license in each of these areas. And these licensing regimes don't come cheap. So you need to spend a lot into attaining such licenses to be able to reach such locations. What we've also seen in terms of what goes against extension of capacity to the landlocked countries, mainly also is terrestrial fiber. I mean, terrestrial fiber in this region, one is not been available. There are a few that are available, but of course, there's a cost, the high cost of maintenance. I mean, because we all know that in Africa and mostly in West Africa, we are developing. And so where development comes with a lot of construction. And what we see in our region is that due to this construction, we see a lot of fiber issues, fiber cuts. This actually increases the cost of maintaining even the few that we have. So we talk about if you want to expand, get more addition, then we also need to bring in capex. There's huge capex to invest, to bring in additional cables, to bring the redundancy from the coastal regions into the main the towns in terms of into the landlocked countries. Also, we can also look at inability. Digitalization has not been expanded that much into switching certain countries, so you don't have available data centers that would probably, once you extend that capacity there, that can probably centralize this content or this capacity and then shared among various partners. So those are some of the things that we see. We see a lot of that. We also don't see a lot of collaboration within the government themselves and then within regulators. So we see a lot of silos, a lot of people working in silos to try and build capacity within their own country. And then they don't really have a linkage with the other countries, maybe in the coastal belt, to see how they can work together to ensure that they have a better synergy going forward. So those are some of the things that we see in our part of Africa.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for this point. Okay, so now we put it into process. I think about even though in the case where there's a fiber, you have fiber down to the shore, there's still this challenge with the terrestrial fiber itself, even within the environment, and then the building of silos for different countries that are actually making policies that are independent. And that's looking at the part of the things that was raised, even in the statistics that was raised at the poll question that would even ask. So I want to throw this to Ben Roberts. What would you consider from your experience with a network that is large across different parts of Africa? What would you consider to be the main hindrance? Just like we have in the poll, and I think many actually said it's the lack of this backbone network within the country. So your opinion and your experience, what do you think is the major hindrance for having backbone or cross-border connectivity in landlocked regions?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I don't like to talk about hindrances. I like to talk about cross-border connectivity being an enabler. And Brian touched upon the aspect of trade and single digital markets. And there are so many areas in things like trade which hinder the movement of goods, the movement of money. But when it comes to digital networks, once you've deployed it once, you don't have to keep building another network. You don't have to apply for a permit to build a network every single time. So I really don't like to talk about enablers, but there's some trends going on at the moment, right? There are three. Patrick's report is showing the big paths of big traffic. There are three technologies which drive big internet traffic, and those technologies are cloud, video, and video gaming. Everything else that the internet does, even communications, audio communications and payments and NFTs and and blockchains and all these other things, they don't use much bandwidth in comparison to even internet surfing, and email doesn't use much bandwidth in comparison to those big technologies. We're seeing those technologies shifting from being delivered on the device to being delivered on the cloud to being delivered at the edge. So now nearly all of those three technologies are predominantly being delivered from the edge, and the edge is becoming more and more important, and they're becoming more and more latency dependent. Things like gaming and now video as well. We're no longer talking of gaming. We're talking convergence of money and gaming and video, and we're calling it metaverse. And this is the development that is really going on. So the conversation for landlocked countries connecting to cable landing stations, for me, is no longer what landlocked countries are actually looking for. Patrick picked on a point. He said subsea system hubs in his presentation. So now landlocked countries no longer need to be connected to a landing station to get to a hub in Europe. They're now looking to connect whatever means necessary to get to one of the subsea system hubs. And that can be terrestrially, if you're directly a neighbor of one of those. If you are a country like Niger or CAR, you've got a border with Nigeria, you can get directly to a subsea system hub that is there. Those subsea hubs are made up of countries that have enabling policy environments, not so ridiculous costs, and a number of subsea cables and internet exchange points. So, the emerging subsea hubs, the ones that have been there for a while, we've talked about for a long time, but they are obviously South Africa, Cape Town, Johannesburg, Djibouti, Kenya, and Lagos has been emerging. But really what's exciting to see in Patrick's presentation is the emergence of, as predicted, I've been talking about this for a while, but emergence of countries like Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon as being small, local hubs. We're seeing a lot of interconnectivity between Cote d'Ivoire and its neighbors, between Cameroon and its neighbors. So, this is the kind of development that's happening. We'll see more emerging hubs. Where those emerging hubs come, you'll see the largest investment in data centers, the largest investment in the most successful internet exchange points, and you'll see the traffic coming there. That is where you'll see then the video content providers, the metaverse providers, the cloud providers. That is where they're going to be making their investments. That is where the jobs will be created and in terms of delivering those POPs. And these are the countries then will start moving faster in adoption of the digital economy. So it's really exciting. Perhaps unsurprising as well is the country that has a lot of subsea cables that isn't doing inter-Africa connectivity is Cameroon. So Cameroon have invested in a number of subsea cables, including one crossing the Atlantic. But I think the costs between the landing stations in Cameroon are more expensive than getting from South Africa to London just to get from one Cameroonian landing station to the other. So no surprise that Cameroon is being left far behind in an opportunity to become a West Africa, subsea system hub. So, really, Patrick's, presentations and data is a real indicator of what is happening. We're seeing conscious efforts by network providers who are building global networks. We're seeing conscious efforts to build networks which inter-Africa can connect. We'll see we're building east-west routes across Africa, and we'll see large pipes between Nigeria and Kenya, Nigeria and South Africa, and Kenya and South Africa, which is already very large. These being the biggest hubs, this is where we're going to see the trends are going. But I think almost everything we could have predicted within the industry is happening, and it's just the countries in West Africa is catching up. I think the barriers are probably dripping away, and the fact that we're seeing these hubs are interconnecting local countries means that the regulatory barriers have probably shifted and people have managed to cross borders, but now we just see the traffic's got to incrementally grow. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So the barriers are actually shifting. So there's even some green lights already seen in this as it goes already with what we are seeing. So that's it. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I would want to ask this as a content provider. So Ben Rea from Meta, as a content provider, what's the perspective like from your, what's it like from perspective of a content provider network. Is this the same challenge you're facing, and what are the challenges that you are facing with getting content into those landlocked countries? Is it really challenging, or what is it like, and what are the current trends that you are actually noticing with your organization?
Cool. So thank you very much, Jacob, for the question. So, standing back and thinking about why, we're trying to make sure, and we're keen, like everyone on the panel, like all of us here, we wanted to bring the internet to everyone, and we're wanting to make that at a high speed and at an affordable price. So some of the challenges we're seeing at the moment is organizations who have the appetite to build infrastructure, but the challenges or the hindrances they're seeing are either geography, so size and scale of the challenge they're trying to build, the cost of existing infrastructure, like Ben touched on at the moment, and then, securing finance for these projects and making the business case to get the right investments to secure those projects and allow them to move forwards. And then, what we're seeing in some markets is the challenges to use this infrastructure that's built in country. So we need the right ecosystem to exist, and we work hard to try and support that. But, if for example, if you have fiber infrastructure, but there's not affordable IP transit maybe on the top of that, then, that can cause a challenge with this infrastructure being used and being successful. And back to the business case, you need to make the right investment to allow these projects to be successful and, allow customers and providers to leverage the assets that are built. We spend a lot of time looking at the kind of quality of experience for the people using our products. And there's a team of us who work very hard on trying to always get our content as close to the people using it as possible. So that means we're trying to always establish into new countries, and we're finding the best ways possible to try and kind of support these builds or support establishment of IXPs to use these local kind of infrastructure builds that happen in country. One challenge that also exists on top of all this is, we're talking about intra-country connectivity. We need to make sure the right last mile exists within the country as well, again, to leverage this fiber. And so, everything we're doing is trying to bring all these ecosystems together to allow them to all combine and move forward and, build a reliable structure for moving forward.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Ben. Sometimes you look at the content network actually wants the content to be as close as possible to the end users, and you have end users within the landlocked. So those challenges also applies to the content network as well. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ben. Okay. Yeah, really okay. So once you ask this next round of questions, each time this comes up, we talked about policies, and when policies are not being made that would enable cross-border connectivity, maybe different governments actually building solutions that are in silos and all that. So talking about governments, because government always comes in, and we talk about governments, and what exactly do we consider to be an incentive? So I'll throw this to Brian. You work with government agencies on policies, and what exactly will be the incentives for the governments offering and enhance border connectivity? How can stakeholders and various capacity convert the unconverted governments that are already making some efforts? Because you talked about this cross-border licensing and all that. So what exactly would be the incentive for the governments of countries that are not really looking at this as a priority? What would you consider to be the incentive for them to take this seriously, and what are the steps that you think needs to be taken in addition to the ones you mentioned in area of cross-border licensing? Yeah, I'm sure Brian is online.
Oh, sorry, I missed that. The question was directed at me. I'm back on.
Yes.
Struggling with Malawi connectivity issues. Please forgive me. We are a landlocked country and we have major challenges with international connectivity. Yeah, so Jacob, I think, if a country or a government is really intent on serving its citizens, it obviously wants to find ways of improving their livelihoods, looking out for their welfare and their growth and development. It goes without saying, and there are a lot of studies that have shown that for the countries in Africa that are able to overcome their territorial, hang-ups, and trade more openly with neighboring countries or interact more openly with neighboring countries, they are able to experience growth. And we've seen this in every region, the North, the South, the East, the West. So, just the development agenda on its own should be a strong enough incentive. In the past, and I know that this has happened many times, we also encountered this in my early work in Kenya, where issues of national security were always brought up as a way to block, progressive networking. I remember when we set up the Kenya Internet Exchange Point back in 2000, it was shut down by the regulator within 2 weeks because they were told by the Telcom Kenya, that it's a threat to national security, and we're going to use it to, I don't know, do what, to send out secrets or whatever. Now, it took us over a year of closed-door meetings and lobbying with intelligence agents, with the military, with ministers or Ministry of Home Affairs, with the regulator themselves to get to the point where they recognized and realized, okay, we were lied to at the beginning. This is a good thing for the country. Let's let it carry on. So, we do have these kind of situations. And when it comes to technology, most governments and officials who hold positions in governments, they don't have a clue, right? And, you fear what you don't understand. So there's a lot of, I think, awareness that needs to be, created at policy levels, at regulatory level, at every level, just to be able to bring ourselves to the point where we can begin to embrace certain initiatives and then look for ways of opening ourselves up to the possibilities that our citizenry can exploit. So, I think I'll stop there. I don't think I've given you a very good answer, but I think other panelists may have a slightly different angle.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, so Mr. MainOne, you have something to say to that?
Yes, I do. I mean, in our part of in Africa, in our part of the regions, West Africa region, in terms of incentives, what we see some countries do. So some of our landlocked countries, what they do is that they partner with people like World Bank, and then they put together a means of extending connectivity from their major nodes to the landlocked borders, so they can connect through there to the coast. We've also seen that they've looked into options whereby they themselves work with, so they form a consortium. So there's this consortium of all the providers and ISPs in the country. They aggregate at a point, and then the government, through also funding from World Bank and other sources, are able to bring in bulk capacity to these nodes. So once this bulk capacity is brought to the node, then this node at this point is a central point in the city. So then everybody comes in there and then they connect. I mean, this is a program that works, but it is not something that can work for a long time. So it's a short term. Once that is done, what they need to do is that the consortium together are supposed to find a way to fund the service going forward, right? So they break the hindrance of not having enough capacity. At least they bring a bulk capacity in there, and then they find among themselves the finances to see how they can take it on and take it forward going forward. So that's one aspect. That's another aspect. The other ones that we feel, which is not really happening, but I feel that the government can look into, it's incentives in terms of tax waivers and things to providers. I mean, so network providers would want to expand infrastructure. The challenge is that if you see the way we are connected in the sub-region, if you are moving from a major city like maybe Lagos or a major city like Accra to the top, you meet a lot of rural areas, right? Now, these rural areas are areas that, as a typical fiber or network provider, you will not make any. There are no major markets there, major economic activities going on there that will allow you to branch off to be able to make some money off connectivity in those areas before it gets to the border. Because nobody really builds a backbone infrastructure from one major city to the other without thinking about what to get along the road. So those are the things that the government needs to look into to bring up, to try and incentivize so that people can then put in more infrastructure to send to those areas. I mean, the other aspect also is we've been talking about infrastructure sharing for a while now. Most of this, and it cannot be done only in the private sector. We believe that infrastructure sharing is something that has to come from the regulator. So what do you mean by infrastructure sharing? So if we can have a national backbone, a fiber backbone, where we have a duct that is secured, that either we share duct or we sharing the fiber itself, to some extent, it reduces the costs to us as the operators in extending capacity from one end to the other. And also because it's more of a shared infrastructure and it's more secured, it reduces the maintenance cost for us in terms of having a lot of cuts and things like that. So those are some of the things that we feel as governments can also put in place to ensure that we expand into such areas. Of course, if you take us as an example, we into connectivity, we also into data center business, and to be able to expand to data center to other locations for the likes of Ben and Co to be able to bring their CDNs to come and co-locate, we need to have the license regimes available to be friendly enough for us to be able to enter the market. So entry into the market, license regime availability, all those things are incentives that governments can strategically or deliberately look into to see how they can attract the likes of us as regional businesses to come and take connectivity and also take data center business into these locations.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Just putting that together, you talk about tax waivers and incentives, and I remember Brian also talked about this business case for connectivity. You know, within the landlocked region, sometimes they are not really the market that is ripe already, and probably someone might not really consider it to be an initial business case and all that. But so how does that really work? So we talked about government, and a few government institutions are actually involved directly in these activities. Infrastructure that is going to be involved. You have private organizations that are going to get involved into that. So I want to ask Brian Roberts on this. So what's the role of partnership with government, as in public-private partnership with getting into those environments, even though it might not really look like a good business case initially because of the region, but the penetration would probably eventually lead to more demand for internet in that area. I know you are involved in connectivity across different countries with your network and all that. So what are the forms of private public partnership that you have experienced, or form of initiatives that probably your organization has worked on to help into reaching those areas that are landlocked?
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, look, one example of a public-private partnership, which I think has worked, and that is in Kenya, where in quite an early stage of stimulating the market. And the government became frustrated at the slow progress of some large, complicated Pan-African collaborations. And the government drove an initiative, which was very much a PPP, to build a subsea cable together. So the government became a 25% owner in the subsea cable, along with private sector actors investing together in a subsea cable. So that is the Teams cable, which connects from Mombasa to UAE. So that's been successful. I think there have been some other government-driven consortium models, but I'm struggling to see PPPs that have really worked in the space of connectivity. What really works best when it comes to government enablement would be for government or government agencies or government institutions to actually be a customer, an anchor customer of a fiber. And Emmanuel was talking very exactly right. As you get into covering the whole of the country, especially a large country like Nigeria, you get to rural areas where there can be very small amounts of economic activity, and you might find very few customers, exactly as Emmanuel said. However, in every single one of those villages in the rural areas, there'll be schools, there'll be health clinics, there'll be government offices, there'll be local chiefs, etc., etc. So, government, if government really, look to connect to all the institutions, of which schools are probably the most, and really then they can enable things like backbone. But if they really enable the private sector to be the central point of service delivery, to actually, we're the ones who know how to build networks, we know how to do services, we know how to do contention ratios and all these things to provide decent broadband. And governments need to perhaps stay out of trying to deliver service levels, to their own offices. Governments can't run networks very well. They can build fiber networks, or they can get financing from the World Banks, has also been discussed, to build networks, but they're not very good at operating and running networks. We, the operators, we know how to do this, and it will get done. So I think if there's a lot of initiatives going on in the world, and I've talked about this a lot. It's my favorite thing around connecting schools. UNICEF and the ITU are driving an initiative to connect all schools in the world to internet. But if government, connect all schools to internet, that not only creates the business case for ubiquitous fiber coverage and universal access, do away with the problem Emmanuel was talking about of not enough customers in those rural areas, but it also is then going to raise the drive and the requirement of tech-savvy youth actually having internet and having access to the internet to actually drive demand. There was a study's come out in the last week or so, which has been in the Economist and in the Economist. It's been sponsored by Ericsson, in fact, but it was revealing that I think the GDP of Sierra Leone could increase by 14.2% if they connect all schools to internet. For Niger, they said 20%. So that's a massive increase in a country's GDP, just for a simple matter of investing in, connecting schools to internet. If you connect all government offices, health clinics, you can really make big differences. So the government's role in this is to be the customer and be the anchor customer to drive adoption.
Okay, thank you. So the government actually being a customer will go a long way in helping, because they don't have to run the infrastructure, the private sector will do. Okay, I think, but looking at all this, it could be when you say it's challenging within the same country to connect to the region of the country that is within the seashore to the landlocked region of the same country, but as you go into different countries. And we talked about government involvement, if there could be challenge with collaboration with government agencies within the same country, or how hard would it be when you are now talking about crossing between two different countries? Probably they might even be speaking different languages and all that. Those could also be challenges that could come all the way. Just before we maybe when we come back, just before that, we want to take a poll right now. So I would I'll be asking Brian to what's the context around does this thing with some countries being Anglophone, some being Francophone, does it play a role in the cross-border connectivity and interaction between the government agencies here and there to actually establish more connectivity? But just before we do that, we'll be taking another poll right now, and that's our second poll. We'll be taking a poll question right now. So we want to confirm from you what's in your own opinion. So the poll question says, select your preferred topic of interest for future peering events. So we've been running a virtual peering forum and AFBIF. So what topic would you consider as a community that you think will be of interest to be taken in next or coming peering events? So we'll leave that poll running. While that poll is running, I would like to ask, so if you have other questions, if you have other topic other than the ones that are highlighted, you can just indicate as well. And also don't forget, if you have questions, let the questions keep coming in. I see some already. Let the questions keep coming in. We'll take the Q&A as we go on in the session. So I am throwing this to Brian Longwe. So what is it? Is that challenges with Anglophone and Francophone countries? How can advocacy be driven to actually get this done, even within these countries that seems to be on different divides?
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. So over the years, we found that participated in that are Pan-African in nature. So, for example, the process that led to the establishment of AFRINIC. AFRINIC is our regional internet registry. It exists to serve the entire continent with managing and administering our IP resources, AS numbers, etc. In the build-up or in the process of lobbying and working to mobilize consensus for the establishment of AFRINIC, the issue of Anglophone and Francophone came up so much. And, it is something that we need to tackle head on. You do have this sort of regional block mentality that has seeped in, where sometimes you'll find that, the Francophone countries will want to push a particular agenda, and Anglophone countries might want to push a competing or an alternate agenda, or this grouping rallies behind one candidate for a particular position. That grouping rallies behind another candidate for another position. So we cannot overlook the fact that there are divisions that we have as a continent. However, if we embrace our diversity, right, we can actually gain a lot of strength from it. And I do believe that at the technical level, at least within the internet fraternity in Africa, there's a lot of unity, there's a lot of strength. It's mostly at the political level that you tend to find these kind of barriers. But technically, even commercially, you do have a lot of trade going on between countries in these regions. Businesses, companies moving across borders, across, the middle line, that invisible middle line that separates Eastern and Western Africa. So yeah, I think practically, I would say, let's focus on the goals. Let the goals be defined, be set, framed in language that can be easily understood by all the parties that are involved. The day that we'll be able to have packets flowing uninterrupted from, South Africa all the way to Senegal over a terrestrial network, I'll say we have won. The day I'll be able to drive, that's one of my dreams, to drive from Tanzania, from Dar es Salaam to Dakar on by road across a highway in Africa. I would love to see that future, but we have to work towards these goals. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Brain. You know, it just brings to mind when I was reading some reports on what happens within the landlocked countries and the ones that are not. So you notice that the challenge that is with technology and connectivity is not only limited to connectivity in terms of broadband, it's also the same with transport and all that. And I think this, if we'll get it right in one area, it can actually build the basis even for the other ones. Just like if connectivity goes right, even building for road and even access for people from different regions without barriers to, I think it's also coming. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that insight. I think it helps. Okay, so we're just looking at, just before we round, just look at areas of the things that can be done, what do we consider to be what could work? And I would want to ask this question, I think for Brian Real now, who, being a content network, and, in recent time, there've been a lot of investments, even from content provider in submarine cable infrastructure, or generally in connectivity infrastructure, generally by content network. So from your perspective, are there some form of initiatives or maybe like programs or plans that content networks actually would work on in order to address this challenge of penetrating those areas that are landlocked, where it might not really seems to make a good business case at the moment to go into? Are there what programs or initiatives, probably the ones that are happening recently, that you want to share?
Sure, thanks for the question. So, I can talk about from the edge perspective, and for Meta, that means, kind of our peering and cache. And, it's what we said earlier, we care about the experience of the people using our products. And so we're always trying to optimize to bring that as near to people as possible. So one of the things we do in a lot of cases, we get a lot of requests and demand to build points of presence in countries. And there's a number of factors that we need for that to be successful. And it's back to this ecosystem story, having the right kind of carrier neutral facility, the right kind of IX, the right kind of number of operators in the market, and where maybe we want to help support a market grow, but it's not the right time to build a POP yet because of various reasons. We will then put an appliance connected to an internet exchange to allow us to serve a subset of the product family over that, and to encourage operators and support operators in the market to connect that into exchange, but also get training, through ISOC and through other organizations to understand best practices on how to operate these networks. Because there's one piece about having the infrastructure and the technology in the country, but also we want local communities and local operators to be able to champion and support this as we move forwards. And there's a number of examples where we've tried to drive that forward in these markets to enable the better ecosystem for the future. So for us, in short, it's about really bringing the content as close as possible, but also supporting the local community to make that happen.
Okay, thank you, Ray. Thank you. So you actually mentioned, talked about getting, even if it's not an environment where we can build a node, you have edge networks, you have caches and all that are being done even by content network. And I think that goes a long way in helping, because with the caches, it actually grows the environment, it increases the demand, and gradually the market gets wider and it becomes a good business case if it wasn't initially. So time runs so fast. Okay, you wanted to add something, Ben?
Yeah, and I was going to say, no, absolutely, to echo that point. And there's markets in Africa where we have started with an IX connected appliance, a cache, you will, but it's an appliance because it serves more than just caching. And we've grown those to full POPs. So Cape Town would be a prime example of that.
Yeah, thank you. I think I noticed that even with the scenario, even here in Nigeria, you have a small node within a region, and then before you know it, the demand grows in that area. It's very, very practical, and it makes that work. Okay, thank you for that input, and think it's helped. So like I was saying, like time runs so fast when things get interesting. I wish we could have more time and then we dig more into it, but we'll just be rounding off with just a few questions just before going into the Q&A sections where we would get to address other questions that might be raised by other participants that are joining online. So just to, in closing this session, I would just want to get, okay, so what's the view? What's it like? What would be a successful business model to operate for a network operator that is running within this within a landlocked country? Because it seems the experience seems different a little from those that are within the countries that have submarine cables coming directly. So, and like Patrick shared earlier, you see the price and the level of availability, redundancy that they can build, because it's landlocked, and then the distance might be so far away and all that. So I would want to put this to Brian Roberts. So what will be a good business model to operate within those regions? A region where it's landlocked, as against when the operator has the opportunity of being in a coastal country.
Look, the business model for telcos is largely the same, whether you are in a landlocked country or a country with a subsea landing. But it's selling data lines, selling data bundles. That's the business model. The business principle, which is going to bring down the costs, is called competition. And if you have, the simple thing is, if you have competition where there are multiple subsea cables in competition, which has got multiple actors and owners, that then causes the different players to compete with each other by keeping cross-connection fees low and this sort of thing, then you have low costs, right? If you have data centers that are connected, then you have low costs. If you are a landlocked country and you have a single operator who controls all the border points and the whole network and everything else, then you have expensive prices. It's that simple. So if you can have as many border crossings or as you like, but if you have a border crossing to a country that has a monopoly, then you are just as messed up as the people that are in the country that are being messed up by that monopoly. So you ideally want to be your neighbors for your cross-border connections. Go to the ones that have the most competition. I think there was some discussion around Malawi and prices of cross-border connectivity to Malawi. Malawi's got some different neighbors, and some of them have competition on the national backbone, and some of them don't. So choose to use the border connections in the countries that have the most competitive landscape, not the ones who seem to have a political bias with signing MOUs and big handshakes. Look at the ones that are actually going to be economically useful.
Yeah, looking at the one that would be economically useful. Okay, just before we go into the Q&A, just one last question, and I'll put this just within 2 minutes. I would appreciate if you can answer this within 2 minutes, Mr. Emmanuel Kwarteng. As we know, with all this and the trend with what you are seeing in the next 5 years, where do you see this going for Africa in terms of interconnectivity, even within the landlocked, with the investments in data centers and then cables coming around? Where do you see the growth in terms of connectivity within the landlocked, as in within Africa countries, within the next 5-10 years? Just within 2 minutes, so we can go on.
Yeah, so within the next 5 to 10 years, I believe that the focus, among the government should be more of collaboration. So we should be seeing a little bit more collaboration between governments, collaboration between regulators, to look at how, because to start with, our markets are very small. I mean, the markets are very small. So any investor coming in looks at the market and looks at the reach. And if the reach is just country reach, then your market is very small. It looks at when you get your value for money or when you get your return of investment, right? So the focus should be more of how the regulators and how the governments can collaborate to ensure that we have a bigger market, so that any investor coming in can have a little bit more reach across the agencies. And I think the governments also, I mean, and I'm mentioning governments because I believe that in our environment, we'll need a lot of collaboration with government. We need them to do even more. Private sector is doing a lot of things, but there are things that private sector might not be able to do. In terms of policy-wise, we need to have a proper policy around infrastructure sharing, proper policy around safe ducts to be installed around the right environment. We need to see that if we invest a lot of money into building cables to the borders on diverse routes, we don't have to be having daily fiber cuts. How do we ensure that we don't do it? It's the same government who is investing in construction, the same government who is getting the people to do the roads. So there has to be a lot of engagement between industry and the government to ensure that the cost of maintenance of these infrastructures are reduced to the minimum. So we should see more of that. We should see more of collaboration. We also should see more of, we should get away from the point where governments seek for funding and work in silos, where the landlocked countries look at their own development and look at how they can extend things, and then they forget about the others. There have to be some collaboration. And of course, universal access funds. I think the countries that don't have it should look into that. I mean, the universal access funds, the target mainly is to extend capacity to the unserved and underserved in terms of voice and data. But of course, once that has been reached, then there's additional funding to look at how to extend funding to the borders. If every country in the sub-region has that, then they can use that funding, because it's extra fund that comes from how the either operators or how some taxes have been taken and put in there. That can help the other and ensure that those areas in terms of rural areas and things are built to, so that people can then go there, operators can then go there and then extend capacity. So that's something I see that in the next 5 years, we should see a lot of that.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. So the world is collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. It's really necessary from private sector, from governments within the same country, and even governments of different countries in African region. So access to common funds and all that would happen when there's collaboration amongst us. Thank you so much for that. I'll be taking the poll next. We'll be taking question and answer after this. So the results from the poll that we shared earlier. Just take it. We have the results for the poll. Anok, the results from the second poll. Okay, yeah. So in terms of the topic that we expect, as in that we from the participants, it seems to have more people interested in data center infrastructure. So the gap is so wide, even compared to the other topic. So top on the list, 49% of the participants actually believe that data center infrastructure will be a good topic to discuss in next event. Okay, so this will be noted, and then we'll consider this and even the priorities as you have indicated in subsequent events that will be coming up, peering events I will be doing. Okay, so I'll be handing over to my co-moderator, that's Michelle, where we'll take few questions. Time is running so fast. We'll take few questions that has been shared that people have placed in the Q&A section. And if you can still, while this is going on, you can still put your questions in the Q&A. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Jacob. We've had such an interesting discussion. The chat was lit. Everyone was really giving a lot of comments. It's been really good to see the discussions going on there, and every experience that people have shared with one another and ideas, which is what we want to see. We want to see Africans collaborating, working together to fix the problems that we have in Africa, right? To create a better Africa for ourselves. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A. I guess we'll start with those. First question, how can we encourage service providers in the industry at large to collaborate more and avoid fiber duplication, especially with the cumbersome cross-border policies? I see Ben Roberts, you had mentioned you wanted to answer this one live. Would you like to take that one?
Yeah, thanks. So often the apparent lack of collaboration is because of lack of information sometimes, but also obviously people are competing with each other. So there has been a bit of a race to build networks. But now we're finding that it does make more sense to collaborate in investments that you're making, and we see that in the subsea world, right? So we see that as being something that happens a lot. But I wanted to touch on, there is an initiative from the World Bank and the ITU to deal with this question, and what they are doing is sort of creating is to create an open mapping format. We do have a few players and researchers in the space who are mapping up fiber networks, but the World Bank, as a major financier of building networks in Africa, ITU as a coordinating body for regulators, are putting together a framework where you can deposit the information about where your networks are in a database that be used to stop duplication, to encourage collaboration. The key to that piece of work is around creating it in such a format that you're not expecting anyone to give away too much of the proprietary information, but to enable a trusted framework where operators will contribute and not infringe anyone's rights about competition. So that's ongoing, and I think it's kicked off last year, and I've been involved in some of the steering of that. But we'll see that coming into fray, I guess, towards the end of the year, as trying to deal with this problem. So it's a problem that people are looking at how to deal with.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Ben. And I think maybe I'll rope in the other Ben to another question. How does the recent shift of focus for metaverse operators to deliver metaverse to advance user markets divert investments and efforts from opening up new African markets?
Thanks, Michelle. Great question. So I guess advanced markets is a super interesting phrase. I'm as committed and to sub-Saharan Africa as was previous to name change we are now, and for the people using our products there. What we need to think about in the future is how we bring these products to market, as we understand what the requirements are for those. And I guess touching to my point I made earlier, clearly we need to be present in these markets. We need to have all the ecosystem elements correct to deliver the products in these markets. So by that I mean a carrier neutral data center, a kind of a metro connectivity, when we're talking connectivity to subsea in a reliable way, and kind of local backbones and regional backbones to help prevent single point of failure. And then it'll be looking towards what the last mile looks like as well. Making sure we're partnering with operators to deliver that experience we want. We do that to an extent already, because the product set we have has a number of requirements. We want to make sure that if someone picks up a WhatsApp call, that works in the way we want. And we'll be just evolving those partnerships as the times and the products evolve. So it doesn't really change what we're doing. It's just we have an eye on the future.
Okay, cool. I think that sounds very encouraging for those who are nervous about it. I think I'd rope in Brian for this question. I think you had spoken to this earlier. What's the problem with national sovereignty or digital sovereignty? Can we have the good and bad points in terms of international connectivity? That's a question from Sylvian, I think in Cameroon.
Yeah, okay. Yes, we have actually sort of engaged in a bit of a discussion in the chat box on this point. And I think the key thing that I was bringing out is, African countries have for many years been victims of a divide and rule sort of approach that has been taken by former colonial powers, and I like to sometimes to say even current colonial powers. There are some countries that are still, really being manipulated, and these have prevented us from integration. Now we cannot downplay those agendas in the context of these kind of discussions, because it informs the policies that are set at a country level. So when you find a government deciding to camp on its digital sovereignty, mountain, and say, we don't want you, we don't need you, we will survive and we will get by on our own. Pretty often at the back you find some, vendor benefiting or pushing that agenda, or some so-called development partner pushing a particular agenda. Now, I won't go into conspiracy theories around the, genesis or, or background to some of the positions that we find, these ridiculous positions we find our governments taking. Suffice it just to say that we need to find ways around or through these obstacles, as the business community, as a technical community, and we need to find ways of continuing advocacy work that will push and push and push until it breaks, and we're able to get the kind of present as well as the future that we all desire.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have probably two more questions. One is surely the reliance on a very small number of landing stations and hubs creates national security challenges. It would be comparatively easy for someone to take out such facilities. Would any one of you want to go and take that question? Do you think is it a national security challenge for only having a small number of hubs across Africa?
I want to give a really brief answer, which is, yes, if you have any concentration risk of everything going through one point, it is a risk to what we call cyber resilience. So I wouldn't say it's national security risk, but it's a matter of cyber resilience. So if you've got one landing station in the country, then that is a risk. If you've got one national data center, then that is a risk. We're seeing the bigger ones, the bigger hubs here. We saw Johannesburg being a hub, but that's actually lots of data centers, interconnected data centers, internet exchanges spanning across data centers. So we're seeing a physical concentration risk being removed. But, Brian talked a lot about national security being a reason to stop progress. And so you actually end up with counterintuitive policy. You actually have policies which in some places are restricting the proliferation of more cable landing stations because they say national security, we have to control this. But then they actually keeping it in the control of one entity, one government-owned entity or one telco or one physical location. So yes, and it's a very valid risk. But what we're seeing is counterintuitive policy, not seeing it the way you're describing it.
Okay. Thank you for that. I think I wanted to just maybe tie into that. Maybe perhaps Emmanuel would want to take this, or anyone else. So what is the role of open access landing stations in improving the interconnectivity across Africa? What would your take be, perhaps?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I was going to jump in and talk about that as well. So back to, if we think about, it's important to create regional backbone networks, whether that's in a country or in a region, because we want to reduce single points of failure. That means these backbone networks are to increase reliability and connect to multiple different subsea stations, multiple different subsea cables. Now, to your question, what's really important here is that, as we think about subsea stations, they're open access environments. So it means it's competitive for the operators to connect and reach the subsea cables and, deliver that crucial connectivity in a competitive, fair and, reliable way. So they kind of partner in with each other. And so the problem is, rather than just having single points of failures, it's about having reliable networks to be able to reach multiple subsea cables, because unfortunately, we all know something will break and something will always fail. So it's about having a reliable backup.
Okay, cool. I think that speaks to the collaboration. Like you said, that would be fundamental for us to enhance the cross-border connectivity and just interconnectivity in general in Africa. So finally, we have Matthew Chigonde's question. Do you see cross-border challenges, even for non-landlocked countries? have we noted incumbents not willing to grant cable landing rights to its operators? Maybe Emmanuel, you'd like to take that one as we close off with the questions we have here on the Q&A? I think you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Yes, sorry. I'll do that. Thank you, Matthew, for the question. So yes, to some extent, yes, you see cross-border connectivity even between coastal countries having issues, one or two, but it's not very common. It's not very common to the extent that, of course, there are other means of connecting to those countries. So you can do through the subsea cable, which is where the challenge is in terms of landing. Then we can also do terrestrial. But if there's only an incumbent in that country that is in charge of everything, then that actually becomes a problem. That is an issue that we face, and it becomes difficult. I think there was a comment in one of the panelists that referenced Cameroon. That would take some time to be done, but that takes policy, it takes government understanding of the times that we are in. It also takes some of us, and when we get opportunity to drum home the benefits that open access and expanding in connectivity has brought to other countries in terms of reduction in cost. Because the idea of having good connectivity to any of these countries is to ensure that the end user gets a very good connectivity at a very low rate and at a very low cost. And we can only do that if we have different ways of bringing capacity into the country, if we have high capacity coming into the country. So I guess there's a lot of work for all of us to do, and there's a lot of work as we also engage various governments to see how best we can bring capacity into those areas.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I think you've wrapped it up for us very well. I think it's been such an engaging discussion. And I think what we've all agreed on is that each and every one of us has a role to play, whether you're in government, whether you're in private sector, whether you're in content, whether you're in cloud, whatever role you're playing in the internet ecosystem. Every single one of us is important to ensuring that we do have this connectivity between our countries, that we build African backbones that will help us be able to decrease the cost of this connectivity that we have, and also grow our networks and our countries. Because we've seen from our discussions that the connectivity has the direct impact on the GDP of our countries, and we all want to see Africa do well. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for such an engaging discussion, both in the chat and with the panelists as well. Thank you, Patrick, for your setting the context for us, for giving us some of the statistics that we had on the trends that have been happening in Africa over the last couple of years. We'd like to thank our sponsors, without whom we would not be here. I would like to thank NAP Africa, Terrico, Meta, PAX, MainOne, and Microsoft, as well as our event sponsors, Rack Center and Workonline. We wouldn't be here without you. We're also grateful to the AFPPC. Everyone works so hard to put this together, along with ISOC and AFIX Secretariat. You've been really instrumental. Thank you to our translators for helping us engage with our bilingual colleagues and creating this event and making it a success. So thank you so much for everyone for joining us today and for staying this long. So I'd like to hand over to Kyle Spencer just for a quick update or overview of what the event has been like compared to our past events. And after which we will have some peering personals, and then we'll get time to party at Gather Town. So Kyle, handing over to you to just give us a quick snapshot of our event. Thank you.
Great, thanks Michelle and everybody. This has been a really good panel discussion. I've enjoyed it, and I think it's really practical, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with some people, and hopefully we can get some better outcomes for cross-border connectivity. This event was actually, the turnout was pretty good. We had around 100 people, not even counting the panelists. As Zoom separates it, there's 22 people considered panelists and another 100 or so that were attendees, and so that's been a pretty good turnout. We have some slides, I think, that showcase past events and some of the data around them. If Henok, you can share, perfect. So just jumping quick into the next slide, there's an overview of the different ways that people have been attending and viewing these sessions. So it varies from event to event, but we have actually a pretty good initial turnout from Zoom, followed by a lot of follow-up views on various social media channels like Facebook, Periscope, which is otherwise known as Twitter now, Livestream, and yeah. And so you can see we usually get around 500 views, counting the live views and other views following that. We do have some occasional events that stand out and go above that. So just for reference, the VPSs that are here on the chart and that are going to be referred to in this data is the depth of transit, number 9, franchise versus homegrown IXPs, part 2, number 10, the peer to peer, which was kind of a post-pandemic analysis of the peering ecosystem, for 11, and 14, which is the 80-20 by 2020 discussion about what's next and what kind of goals we should set for ourselves as a region. We skipped around a little bit in the data because the numbers that are missing from the chart were the Women Tech Connect, and they used a different platform to analyze the stats, and we didn't have that data. But you might be able to get that elsewhere from them. The Zoom attendance rate's pretty good consistently. I don't recall how many people signed up for this versus the number of people that attended, which again was around 100, 122 if you count the panelists. We usually get about 55%, and that's pretty consistent. Next slide. We have a breakdown of French versus English engagements for the live streams, Facebook, Twitter, because they're different channels. Traditionally, of course, the audience is dominated by English language content and therefore the English language audience. But we have had events. You can see VPS number 9 had a huge French engagement, actually, about the same amount as English. If you combine and assume that the bottom was English as well. We get a fair amount of engagements, although I think this is something we need to work more on. Facebook was a big one in that VPS number 9, but and probably, yeah, Facebook is the dominant way that people engage. Although Zoom questions, which are of high value during the live event, are also significant. We get visitors from a number of countries around the world. You can see, obviously, the event with the larger audience, number 9, was from 62 countries, and then around 40 for the other ones. Interestingly, 24, which was VPS 14, which was the 80-20 by 2020 discussion, had approximately the same amount of attendees as, say, VPS number 10, but from a much smaller number of countries. And I think that was because it was a more sort of introverted discussion about the African region. Where we've come from and where we want to go next. Next slide. Right, so again, unique page views and language per event. English is dominant, but we do have some French engagement from the page views. And the dominant way we seem to be engaging with people is through the direct links, which I think is through the mailing list. So we're very good at that. There is some buzz, obviously, around the events, which we're picking up on Google links, which is the second most popular way people seem to come to our events. And then the social media channels like Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and then the website follow that. So this is all good, but it looks like we need to really up our game when it comes to engagement on the social media platforms. And we've had 10 unique sponsors across the series. Including MainOne, DKIX, PAX, Lynx, Rack Center, Microsoft. Those are the event sponsors. For the series sponsors that have been with us throughout, we've got Facebook, otherwise known as Meta now, NAP Africa, and Flex Optics has been really helpful with the interpretation sponsorship as well, so that we can provide this in multiple languages. And that's all we've got for you for the stats. And so at that point, I'd like to hand over to Gilan, who's going to lead us through the peering personals. Gilan?
Yes, thank you very much. Everyone, thank you for the panelists for the interesting discussions. For the peering personals, we have someone from Bwakarabelo from Botswana Fiber Networks. Is he online? Can you raise your hand if you are here? If not, we can pass and go to the next one. Charles Ikusan, can you enable your microphone and present your network?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, fine. This is Charles from Internet Statement of. As we can see, we are ASN 36932. In our networks, we have 95 members. Traffic at the moment is 150 gig per second. Our parent locations in Nigeria, Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, Kano, Enugu. In Lagos, we have more of our POPs in Sakata, ICNL, MDXI, Cloud Exchange, Africa Data Center. Then we are open bilateral pairing policy. As you can see from our screen, our email is also there, and also our website is isp.net.ng. So we are open to you guys. Anybody that wants to come to Nigeria, because we are fast growing and we want to grow with you. I don't your management this year, but we are want to help you to get to that peak that you want to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you. Next up is Delzio Kaba. Delzio Kaba from Webmasters LDA. Delzio, are you online?
Yes.
Can
everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you for the opportunity. First, I would like to say that this is actually a great place and a great subject for all African operators. And I believe Africa, based on statistics, is probably the fastest growing continent in terms of bandwidth. So I would like to maybe emphasize some inputs that can contribute to this subject that we are discussing here. I already put some ideas on the chat.
You can present your network directly, please. You can please
Sorry?
directly. Can you please present your network directly?
Yes.
Yes.
I thought everyone was already seeing that. I work for Webmasters. We are a telecommunicator operator based in Mozambique. We own a 4G network, 4G LTE network for fixed access. We only provide data services.
Okay.
We have presence in Mozambique at the local exchange point. And also we have presence in Upper Africa, in Johannesburg, Terraco Isando Data Center.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yes, I would like to give my contribution regarding this subject. I would like to see the government taking more importance on the OPGW infrastructure that belongs to the power companies. As everyone knows, the power companies, they also have fiber infrastructure, but obviously they're using for their own needs for power communications and other things. But that same infrastructure can obviously be used for telecommunication and cross-border connectivity. And Botswana is one of the countries, one of the leading countries in that approach. Brazil is also a good example. So I would like to give that, I'd like leaders to have more attention on that infrastructure, because it's something that is already established. We don't need to build fiber where we already have it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Next up is Kyle.
Hi
Kyle,
again.
can
Yes,
you-
yes. I'm Kyle Spencer from the Uganda Internet Exchange Point. We have 29 connected networks with a lot of membership diversity, access, carrier, content, research and education, government, enterprise, DNS, etc. We're open to multilateral and bilateral peering. We're not going to tell you what to do. And we're now available in Raxio, Uganda's first carrier-neutral data center. And both of our nodes, the legacy node and the new node in Raxio, are interconnected. So you can access our entire membership from either location. If you want to get in touch with us, go to uixp.co.ug and the contact information is there.
Thank you very much, Kyle. I think these are the end. This is the end of the pairing personals. I would want to invite you to the social gathering that will be following. But before that, I just wanted to mention that FlexOptic is one of the sponsors of the simultaneous interpretation. So that one was missed at the end of the mention at the end, but I wanted to highlight that. But going forward to the social event, we are going to pass the link to the social event in the chat room so everyone can see that. And yes, thank you, Enoch. So you in the chat room, you can see the GatherTown link. You can click on that and then join the social event just for a few minutes to discuss furthermore about the topics of interest that has gathered us together this afternoon. So it's straightforward to use. Use preferably Mozilla Firefox or Google Chrome for the best experience. So those are the most important points I wanted to mention about the social event. Other than that, I would like to thank everyone, the PC, FPPC, the moderators, the panelists, everyone, the team at ISOC, the simultaneous interpretation team. Thank you for all the support and see you soon in the next event. Thank you very much and have a good rest of the day or good night, depending on where you are. Thank you.